All right. Good morning, everybody. I'm Judy Neal, and today we're going to do a session looking at a TED.com talk titled Take the Other to Lunch. And I chose this particular talk, the TED Talk, because of some of the work that Samantha has been doing and the work regarding Martin Luther King. And I'm forgetting the name of the people. It's not the People's March on Poverty, the Poor People's Campaign. And so having come to some of these sessions and been so inspired about things we can do, I wanted to offer something that Elizabeth Lesser has been exploring around ways we can reach out to other people and be of service and learn and grow. So we're going to watch this. This is 11 minutes. And then I've given a handout that summarizes some of the ground rules and questions that she talks about, questions that you could talk about when you're with somebody who's different from you. And then I've given you some table discussion questions, so we'll talk about those.
This room may appear to be holding 600 people, but there's actually so many more because within each one of us, there's a multitude of personalities. I have two primary personalities that have been in conflict and conversation within me since I was a little girl. I call them the mystic and the warrior. I was born into a family of politically active, intellectual atheists. There was this equation in my family that went something like this. If you are intelligent, you therefore are not spiritual. I was the freak of the family. I was this weird little kid who wanted to have deep talks about the worlds that might exist beyond the ones that we perceive with our senses. I wanted to know if what we human beings see and hear and think is a full and accurate picture of reality. So looking for answers, I went to Catholic Mass. I tagged along with my neighbors. I read Sartre and Socrates, and then a wonderful thing happened when I was in high school. Gurus from the East started washing up on the shores of America. And I said to myself, I want to get me one of them. And ever since, I've been walking the mystic path, trying to peer beyond what Albert Einstein called the optical delusion of everyday consciousness. So what did he mean by this? I'll show you. Take a breath right now of this clear air in this room. Now, see this strange underwater coral reef looking thing? It's actually a person's trachea. And those colored globs are microbes that are actually swimming around in this room right now, all around us. If we're blind to this simple biology, imagine what we're missing at the smallest subatomic level right now, and at the grandest cosmic levels. My years as a mystic have made me question almost all my assumptions. They've made me a proud I don't know it all. Now, when the mystic part of me jabbers on and on like this, the warrior rolls her eyes. She's concerned about what's happening in this world right now. She's worried. She says, excuse me, I'm pissed off and I know a few things and we better get busy about them right now. I've spent my life as a warrior, working for women's issues, working on political campaigns, being an activist for the environment. And it can be sort of crazy making, housing both the mystic and the warrior in one body. I've always been attracted to those rare people who pull that off, who devote their lives to humanity with the grit of the warrior and the grace of the mystic. People like Martin Luther King Jr., who wrote, I can never be what I ought to be until you are what you ought to be. This, he wrote, is the interrelated structure of reality. Then Mother Teresa, another mystic warrior, who said, the problem with the world is that we draw the circle of our family too small. And Nelson Mandela, who lives by the African concept of Ubuntu, which means I need you in order to be me, and you need me in order to be you. Now, we all love to trot out these three mystic warriors as if they were born with the saint gene, but we all actually have the same capacity that they do. And we need to do their work now. I'm deeply disturbed by the ways in which all of our cultures are demonizing the other, by the voice we're giving to the most divisive among us. Listen to these titles of some of the best-selling books from both sides of the political divide here in the US. Liberalism is a mental disorder. Rush Limbaugh is a big fat idiot. Pinheads and patriots arguing with idiots. They're supposedly tongue-in-cheek, but they're actually dangerous. Now here's a title that may sound familiar, but whose author may surprise you. 4.5 years of struggle against lies, stupidity, and cowardice. Who wrote that? That was Adolf Hitler's first title for Mein Kampf, My Struggle, the book that launched the Nazi Party. The worst eras in human history, whether in Cambodia or Germany or Rwanda, they start like this, with negative otherizing, and then they morph into violent extremism. This is why I'm launching a new initiative, and it's to help all of us, myself included, to counteract the tendency to otherize. And I realize we're all busy people, so don't worry, you can do this on a lunch break. I'm calling my initiative, Take the Other to Lunch. If you are a Republican, you can take a Democrat to lunch. Or if you're a Democrat, think of it as taking a Republican to lunch. Now, if the idea of taking any of these people to lunch makes you lose your appetite, I suggest you start more local, because there is no shortage of the other right in your own neighborhood. Maybe that person who worships at the mosque, or the church, or the synagogue down the street, or someone from the other side of the abortion conflict, or maybe your brother-in-law who doesn't believe in global warming. Anyone whose lifestyle may frighten you, or whose point of view makes smoke come out of your ears. A couple of weeks ago, I took a conservative Tea Party woman to lunch. Now, on paper, she passed my smoking ears test. She's an activist from the right, and I'm an activist from the left. And we used some guidelines to keep our conversation elevated, and you can use them too, because I know you're all going to take another to lunch. So first of all, decide on a goal to get to know one person from a group you may have negatively stereotyped. And then before you get together, agree on some ground rules. My Tea Party lunchmate and I came up with these. Don't persuade, defend, or interrupt. Be curious, be conversational, be real, and listen. From there, we dove in, and we used these questions. Share some of your life experiences with me. What issues deeply concern you? And what have you always wanted to ask someone from the other side? My lunch partner and I came away with some really important insights, and I'm going to share just one with you. I think it has relevance to any problem between people anywhere. I asked her why her side makes such outrageous allegations and lies about my side. What, she wanted to know. Like we're a bunch of elitist, morally corrupt terrorist lovers. Well, she was shocked. She thought my side beat up on her side way more often, that we called them brainless, gun-toting racists. And we both marveled at the labels that fit none of the people we actually know. And since we had established some trust, we believed in each other's sincerity. We agreed we'd speak up in our own communities when we witnessed the kind of otherizing talk that can wound and fester into paranoia, and then be used by those on the fringes to incite. By the end of our lunch, we acknowledged each other's openness. Neither of us had tried to change the other, but we also hadn't pretended that our differences were just going to melt away after a lunch. Instead, we had taken first steps together, past our knee-jerk reactions to the Ubuntu place, which is the only place where solutions to our most intractable seeming problems will be found. So, who should you invite to lunch? Next time you catch yourself in the act of otherizing, that'll be your clue. And what might happen at your lunch? Will the heavens open and We Are the World play over the restaurant sound system? Probably not. Because Ubuntu work is slow and it's difficult. It's two people dropping the pretense of being know-it-alls. It's two people, two warriors, dropping their weapons and reaching toward each other. Here's how the great Persian poet Rumi put it: out beyond ideas of wrongdoing and right doing, there is a field. I'll meet you there.
Let's see, is this on? No. At your tables, you have this handout, and there are questions that are on the last section called table discussion. So I want to give you some moments to talk about these questions, like who seems most likely to be the other for you? For me, it very much is like Elizabeth Lesser. The people on the right, for me, tend to be very hard to understand, the Tea Partiers. And then I've met some people, gotten to know them as beautiful human beings, gotten to understand where they're coming from, and it's really expanded my compassion, my understanding, without changing how I feel about particular policies. Second question is, have you ever done anything like this, taking someone that you otherize? Have you taken someone like that to lunch? And if so, what was your experience? Share that at your table. And then I wanted to tie this into Christianity and say, what are some examples from the life of Jesus that are similar to what Elizabeth Lesser is modeling? And then bring it more personal. What have we done at St. Paul's? I think St. Paul's does a lot of this kind of work. So what are some examples of reaching out to the other and finding more of that oneness? And then the last question is there something more we at St. Paul's could be doing? And maybe you want to take that more personally too and say, is there something more I personally could be doing? So I invite you, especially if there's like two people at a table, you might want to join another table so the discussion gets richer. And we'll spend about 10 minutes on these questions. So you may not get to all of them. You could just pick and choose which questions you'd most like to answer. And then I'll come around with the microphone and see what you have to say. take about 30 seconds to wrap up whatever you're talking about right now, and I'll be coming around with the microphone. Well, thank you so much. The discussions are powerful and deep, and I'm hoping you'll share some of the things you've come up with the rest of the group. So I'm looking for hands. Who would like to share something that was talked about in your group? You want to still keep talking to each other. So who would like to share one of the topics that was discussed at your group, particularly if you have any insights or strong reactions to this video? Thank you.
I was just saying that when you...
And get it real close to your... Oh, wait, let me check. Is this not on? Yeah, that'll help.
I was just saying when you try to speak to somebody who you consider, quote,
Yeah, keep it close to
the other, that it's important to try to find common ground. And the other thing that we were talking about is how it would be kind of intimidating to go up to somebody and say, we're really different, do you want to have lunch? And so we thought that maybe you could talk with people who had more similar ideas with you and like brainstorm about, why do you think people voted for Donald Trump or whatever, or why do you think people have these differing views, the Republicans, and try to think of some reasons why, people wanted change before you kind of present it to somebody else, because that would be kind of intimidating. And the other thing that I was talking about is that I think as humans, we all are just very fearful, and we just need to work towards not being so fearful, and we're afraid of anything that's foreign or different than us, and we need to, try to be courageous and, talk to people who we are afraid of or think are very different than us, and that would kind of open things up. So.
Thank you. So one idea then is, before inviting someone who seems to have a different worldview from each other, before inviting them to lunch, get together with like-minded people and explore what is it we're not seeing that we don't understand? What might be some of the reasons people think or do or believe or vote the way they do? And then after that, you might feel better prepared to reach out to someone different. Yes?
Pastor Lowell gave a talk about, a year ago, with this hierarchy of, with some philosopher, I forget the guy's name, this hierarchy from individual consciousness to tribal consciousness to group consciousness. And it seems to be that these techniques that we're trying to learn today are trying to move us from a tribal consciousness to more of a group consciousness. Because if there's someone's the other, they're not a member of your tribe.
Right.
And the angle is to try to overcome that somehow to a larger, more benign view of everyone.
Yeah. So, Ray, do you have any ideas about how to make that jump?
Well, the only idea I got is the one you gave me here on this worksheet. But I think this is useful. Where you talk about discussion questions, share some, you're talking to the other person. Please share some of your life experiences with me. What issues deeply concern you? What have you always wanted to ask someone from the other side? So the trick is to get the person, this is I think the basic insight of Dale Carnegie also, that the most interesting thing to a person is themselves. So if you can get them to talk about themselves, then you're halfway there. I thought the hook, the angle on this whole presentation was this last question. What have you always wanted to ask someone from the other side? That's kind of like the money question in this whole exercise.
Thank you, thank you. Yes.
A long while back when I was in school, I had some teacher that said our forefathers who wrote the Constitution created the Electoral College to kind of protect our country from the popular vote. Like, as in, the popular vote would often back then be people who were illiterate, and they didn't want them to control the vote. And, I mean, the outcome. And so they created the Electoral College as kind of a shield. And so it still exists today. And so that seems like where we're still at.
That basic belief system that,
Yes.
that some other is not good enough to have a voice in the country.
Right. And so you come right back to, is this person who's illiterate or who has some disability, is their vote worthless? Okay. And then we have to live with the results. And this president was not popularly elected.
Right. Thank you. So is anybody here in this room a strong proponent of the Electoral College? Just out of curiosity.
Oh, why not?
Would you please go to lunch with him? But when something like that disturbs you, and it disturbs me too, so I'm with you, so we shouldn't go to lunch. But we'll just reinforce each other's belief. But if there is somebody who does believe different, and Ray's willing to play the game, if there is somebody who has a different perspective, then literally go to lunch and explore that and understand, because when we get stuck, there's something we aren't seeing. Oh, I bet you believe in the Electoral College, Roger.
I think one of the things that happened at our table
And
was,
keep that up close.
one of the things that happened at our table, and it was brought up, was some of the conversations that you're having here were duplicated here, but one of the things that were brought up was when you start talking to the other is take a step back, take a breath, and try to find a place of non-judgment and find the intent of what they're saying. In what they're really saying, as opposed to flying off into the subject began with school shootings, and it evolved almost automatically into eliminating the Second Amendment, and then we went into the Constitution and how to change the Constitution, and we couldn't have had that conversation without stepping back and having and being non-judgmental in the position that you have. But it was an interesting conversation.